last round. Milo with an impressive performance to get into the top 8. Can he repeat it? He's going to have to beat our 1 seed Jim Davis. We're going to start. Jim, as a result of being the 3rd seed, will be on the play for game 1.
In my humble opinion, the most impressive match we had all weekend long was JB Milo's winning in for top 8.
And Milo could not, other player, local from the area, players speaking very highly of him at just, I believe, you know, still under 18 with his first top 8 performance here, and really, you know, put on a display last round. We hope to see one again. Jim starts out on Mystic Monastery, and it will be Foundry Street Denizen on Milo's side.
So Jim playing a list here that's much more geared towards beating mid-range strategies and devotion strategies. May come back to haunt him a little bit in this matchup. He's got some action in the sideboard here to help shore it up, but his copies, 3 main deck copies of Valorous Stands and 4 main deck copies of Outpost Siege, unlikely to be very good contributors here.
Yeah, second land for Jim, and if you look at his hand, though, it looks like he has a lot of game going on here. A copy of Soulfire Grandmaster and 2 copies of Wild Slash in his opener. I believe doubles of both cards. Those seem to be tools that would be very well suited to play against mono red aggro.
If the 2-drops go uncontested, it's a really big deal for Jim. Now, you know, with Wild Slashes and Lightning Strikes and all sorts of removal, that's unlikely to happen. But if one happens to slip through the cracks, just gaining a little bit of life can really swing the damage race.
All right, well, Monastery Swift Spear will come into play. That will pump up Founder Street Denizen, and Milo will then Wild Slash the Soulfire Grandmaster. So here's a swing in. That's going to be for 4 damage. 2 from the Denizen, 2 from the Swift Spear. Jim is down to 16.
Pretty great start here for Milo.
Yeah. Now, if you look at Jim's hand, he does have cards like another Soulfire, a Seeker of the Way, 2 more Wild Slashes. He can Wild Slash with Lifelink here. There's a lot of good anti-aggro plans that he can go for.
Yeah, he definitely drew the right portion of his deck for trying to shore up the beatdown matchup here.
Turn 3, Jim will crack Flooded Strand, getting Plains. Has so far been able to take very little damage off his lands in the face of a mono-red opponent. But without a card like Hoarding Outburst, how does Jim stabilize, I suppose, in this matchup?
Well, this is the starting point here, is Seeker of the Way, and he has Wild Slash this turn. So if Milo gets a little sloppy or a little over-aggressive, Jim might potentially be able to gain some life, kill one of Milo's threats, and then start deploying his more expensive, more powerful cards.
You see in Milo's hand, he has Lightning Strike, Monastery, Swift Spear, Mardu, Scout, Searing Blood, a lot of good options. The Lightning Strike will take care of the Seeker. Searing Blood is certainly the aggressive play, but it's risky. He's got to know Wild Slash exists.
Yeah, it's a very, very risky play. Lightning Strike is much more conservative. And the thing is, I don't think that Milo really needs to take the risk, because Searing Blood has other things to be doing in this matchup. I guess the other line is just develop his board here.
Yeah, he's going to play Monastery, Swift Spear, Fire Drinker, Satyr. And I really like how this plays around the prowess here. So Swift Spear and the Fire Drinker Satyr pumps Founder Street Denizen up to a 3-1, and he's just going to swing the Denizen.
Exactly. This is a great hedge because it allows Milo to develop his board this turn. In the event that Jim has a Wild Slash, well, he's Wild Slashing something and then trading, which is not nearly as bad for Milo as if Jim gets to swallow up one of these creatures.
Yeah, on the backside, this does mean if Jim doesn't have the next turn, simply Lightning Striking the Seeker of the Way is huge, as it's a ton of damage. You see Jim, he'll go ahead and actually just Wild Slash away the Foundry Street Denizen. And that's got to be a victory for Milo. Jim used a 1-mana Wild Slash and didn't get the prowess lifelink off his Seeker.
Yep, this is some great discipline here thus far from JB. The same elements we saw in the last round of the Swiss here. And it's so good because he's advancing his board and getting to advance with 2 copies of Monastery Swift Spear when your follow-up is a bunch of spells. That's so powerful.
Yeah, Soulfire Grandmaster the play for Jim. He drew a 3rd copy of Soulfire Grandmaster. Of note, Milo missed his 3rd land last turn, whereas Jim missed his 4th this turn. So both players are going to have to do some resource management on top of creature management. Milo drawing a mountain this turn. Still has Mardu Scout, Searing Blood, and Lightning Strike to go with that mountain. And he's going to start here with Searing Blood. Points that at the Soulfire Grandmaster, not at Seeker of the Way. A good move here, because if Jim wants to get lifelink off his Wild Slash, he'll have to cast it now, and then Milo will know that the coast is not clear to swing with a creature.
Exactly, and I think at this point he's also just saying, I think it's unlikely Jim has another copy of Wild Slash in hand. This is a much riskier play.
Yeah, and this is a play where Jim can get some value, so Milo's going to go ahead and swing the team. His Swift Spears have prowessed up to a 2-3, and now Jim is going to get some solid value off the Wild Slash.
Yeah, if he has one to follow up here, it's a pretty rough turn for Milo. This is the first time where he took a line that's perhaps a little more aggressive than he needed to.
Yeah, and I think maybe he thought that because Jim didn't use the Wild Slash in response to Searing Blood while the Grandmaster was on the table, that meant Jim didn't have one.
Yeah.
But you see, yeah, Wild Slash will take care of Fire Drinker's Head, or Milo will take 2, go to 18. And here's the cincher, though. Monastery Swift, the Seeker pumps up to a 3-3. It'll eat the Swift Spear, and Jim will gain 3 more, go up to 15, and only take 2. So Jim actually nets life points for that turn.
I think a safer play that turn would have been for Milo simply to Lightning Strike away the Seeker of the Way. Yes, Jim gets to untap and maybe hit you for 2 and maybe follow up with a burn spell, but this is sort of the disaster state for Milo.
Yeah. And this has represented a really tough hand for Milo to play around. 2 Grandmasters, 2 Wild Slashes, and a Seeker. That's a lot of life gain and a lot of cheap removal.
Yeah, this is one of the better draws Jim's deck can offer up here in the matchup. I mean, really, only the Outpost Siege stands out as a not very efficient card, and even the Outpost Siege is shaping up to be significant.
And now we'll see Jim wants to close out the game, and Milo's going to have to rebuild. Jim is still lower on life points, 13 to 18. Milo has the advantage. Milo's remaining hand is Mardu Scout and Lightning Strike. Jim has Outpost Siege and Soulfire Grandmaster number 3. He'll go ahead and swing the Seeker. Milo down to 16, and he'll just play Soulfire Grandmaster. So we'll give Milo an opportunity to fire off that Lightning Strike. But this is a tough spot. These are all creatures that Milo really needs to kill.
Yep. The 2 drops here are so important for Jim in a variety of respects.
Draw is another Lightning Strike for Milo, so that will give him the weapon with which to kill off Jim's creatures. Dangerous spot, however. We know Jim has the Outpost Siege next turn. Milo will swing for 1 with Monastery Swift Spear.
Hoping that Jim here will offer up a block. I would be stunned if he does anything here with the Soulfire Grandmaster.
Yeah. And once Jim says no blocks, now Milo's going to go ahead and strike down the Soulfire Grandmaster. Swift Spear prowesses to a 2-3. Jim goes to 11. Jim is going to gain all this back, however, with this Outpost Siege. And here's Outpost Siege. It triggers prowess on Seeker. It's a 3-3 lifelink. We'll see Jim set this. I imagine it's Takan's. He's going to go for the control strategy here. Swing for 3 life points, and this Seeker of the Way is dealing a lot of damage.
Yep. Totally controlling the damage race here.
14 on Jim's side, 13 on Milo as Jim takes the lead for the first time. And we'll start to pull away on cards. We go back over to Milo. A great draw, however. Monastery Swift Spear was his draw for the turn. He has Lightning Strike in hand as well. He can get that Seeker off the board and deal a lot of damage here.
Yeah, that's about as good as you can ask for in the spot. I suppose Searing Blood would be ideal here instead of Lightning Strike, but this is a pretty good setup.
Yep. So Swift Spear played, Lightning Strike takes down Seeker, and Milo swings in for 4. Jim is down to 10. So now Jim's going to have to start the grinding game. Jim's 2 cards a turn. We'll see what Outpost Siege can bring. Wild Slash number 3 is the revealed card, and Stoke is the card he drew here. If Jim can draw the all 2 drops and 1-mana removal half of this deck, this looks like a good matchup for him.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. Even still, I think if JB was a little more cautious on that one big turn, we still might be seeing a different outcome here, but I like Jim's position.
And Seeker of the Way for Jim. And Wild Slash will take down the Swift Spear. These 2 drops are just doing such good work. As 10 to 13, Jim's still keeping the life race close. We'll go over to Milo. He's going to have some dead draws when he hits mountains. Stoke the Flames, however, was the draw for this turn. If he wants to cast Stoke, it'll cost him his entire turn. He may have to do it anyway, though, keeping Seeker on the board so dangerous.
Yeah.
He's going to, looks like he's going to dash Mardu Scout. Perhaps playing it, but it's dashed. It swings in for 3.
I think that Jim's in a position here that he does not have to offer up a block. The worst case scenario next turn is he can use Stoke the Flames to kill the Swift Spear, attack for 3 points of lifelink, and try to manage the Mardu Scout that way.
Yeah, it is an interesting move here by Milo, though. I think he's recognizing that the Seeker is very powerful against him, and he's trying to get Jim into a spot where Jim will trade. Turns out Jim does not.
I think in that spot I would probably have just cast it, because the Soak the Flames in JB's hand is getting a little bit clunky.
Yeah, he does not have very many lands. You see back over on Jim's side, he gets a Mantis Rider off the Outpost Siege, draws land for the turn.
And nothing wrong here with a Mantis Rider, plus the land drop allows, again, Jim to get some aggression in play and hold up Stoke the Flames, which is really potent to have in conjunction with your Seeker away and Mantis Rider on defense.
We go back here. This combination of so many 2-drop lifelink creatures out of Jim's side has really put a dent in Milo's game plan. Jim has gained 8 life already this game. Milo has dealt 21. And it looks like Jim's going to go for that Mantis Rider he got for free here. Does have the lands to still not take any damage as he casts it.
So yeah, Jim just trying to be as careful as possible here. Doesn't want to take any unnecessary points of damage.
I'm going to go ahead and fetch down to 6. Wants to see Milo's graveyard. Milo actually has had a pretty solid draw here as far as combination, not getting too many lands or too few lands.
Oh yeah, 3 lands and then stopped basically. I think he missed his 3rd land drop for a moment or two, but he needs every piece of action that he's drawn so far this game because it's already looking pretty bleak for him. And if he had, one more land instead of one other piece of action here, Jim may have already won this game.
And here Jim plays in the Mantis Rider, puts Milo down to 10, 1 card remaining in his hand, but that card is Stoke the Flames. So in a pinch, Jim will have the ability to cast that burn spell and to prowess his Seeker of the Way. 4th land drawn by Milo. And he's in a tough spot. Both players with particularly, I would say, strong draws this game.
Yeah, this is about the best punch each of them can throw here game 1. Milo with a lot of action here, a lot of removal, and Jim with a bunch of cheap removal. His quality 2 drops in the matchup. Buying time for him able to grind out the game with Outpost Siege.
It's going to be looks like it'll be Mardu Scout again from Milo. We'll see if it's a cast or a dash. Wants to do that. Both players have 1 card in hand. Both players have that 1 card as Stoke the Flames, but it looks like it's going to go Jim's way. Jim with better creatures on the board and that Outpost Siege in play. He is lower on life points, so has to be careful here. And it does feel like Milo's out is to just and I think this is what he's playing to. He's going to try to end step Stoke the Flames Jim and then just draw a burn spell. And if Jim doesn't pull the trigger here and prowess his Seeker of the Way, that could work.
And I think that Jim's very likely to send in the Seeker of the Way this turn just to prevent that sort of outcome. Also, the second Mantis Rider on top of the Stoke
makes it lethal.
It's lethal.
And so that does make the situation easier. Jim's going to go ahead and swing in with 2 Mantis Riders. That'll put Milo down to 4 if he doesn't burn one of them. See if Jim wants to send Seeker as well. With 2 Vigilance creatures, it's pretty tempting to just send the team.
I think there's an argument for not sending the Seeker because it makes Milo less inclined to kill a Mantis Rider if there's a removal spell in his hand.
It's true. Jim is going to swing the team. That's 8 damage coming across. Yeah, the Seeker swing certainly feels like Jim's last card's a burn spell.
Right. It's a weird sort of situation, but it's probably safer to attack with the Seeker. Because, Milo may use a spell here anyway, and then you gain some life, but it does sort of give away the last card in hand as a spell.
I mean, so if you're on Milo's side, what I would say is you suspect it's a spell, because it certainly looks like a spell, but you might play this game as though it were a land, because if Jim has a spell, I'm just not sure you win.
Exactly.
And yeah, that's how he plays it. He's going to put Monster Sister in front of Seeker, cast the Stoke the Flames, and say, boy, I sure hope your last card's a land.
And what's great about this is Jim can just pass, because if Milo allows combat to resolve as is, then he doesn't have enough mana to stoke, and Jim can just stoke him post-combat.
And he's going to stoke at Jim. Well, he'll stoke back at Milo, and game 1 goes over to Jim Davis.
Yeah, Jim, with a great draw that game, drew the critical pieces of his deck, and one potentially risky play from Milo, and that was all the opening Jim needed to take over.
So game 1 goes to Jim Davis. Remember, Jim currently the season leader going into the Invitational in 2 weeks is when our invitational comes up. This is the Season 1 Invitational in Richmond. Those of you not familiar with the Star City Games Invitational circuit, we have 4 of them, 1 for each quarter of the year. And with that comes a giveaway and the ability for a person to get their likeness on a card. We actually had that last season with Dylan Donegan. He was the champion of our Season 4 Invitational in Seattle last December. His token, which is what he won, he chose the 1/1 Elemental token off of Young Pyromancer that helped him win the tournament. And you too can receive this token. This is given away during all of our 20K Open Series players and all our Premier 5K Premier IQ players. This is available in any Premier, not just our Premier IQs, but any Premier IQ held around the world. And this is, and right now these are currently giving out. So you can receive these. If you can't make it out to one of these tournaments, you can also receive them by placing an order with StarCityGames.com. It has to be a $5 minimum order.
And remember, these tokens are available for just a limited time here. Once we're done with Richmond, there'll be a new champion and a new token. So if you want to get your hands on the Dylan Donegan token, make sure to join one of our large events, either the 20K Open Series or a 5K Premier IQ, or place an order of minimum $5 or more on StarCityGames.com.
All right, heading back to the match. JB Milo down a game to Jim Davis. Jim has the first one. We'll look to the sideboard. A pretty good steal for Jim. He was on the play, so it's a pretty even match. But once again, when you're the mono red player, you're almost always hoping to win game ones.
Yeah, that's the one you're trying to steal there. And now JB with an uphill climb here. Sideboard here of a Heel Cutter, 2 Prophetic Flame Speakers, 4 Eidolon of the Great Revel, 2 Hammer of Perforos, 2 copies of Arc Lightning, 2 copies of Bathe in Dragonfire, and 2 copies of Peak Eruption. Without any copies of Hordeling Outburst in Jim's deck, I'm way less interested in bringing the Arc Lightnings that we saw Milo put to good effect in his last round of the Swiss. Therefore, I'm really only interested in the 4 copies of Eidolon the Great Revel, which I think are great in this matchup, particularly on the play.
Now, we did see cards, so Jim does not have Hordeling Outburst. He does have things like Mantis Rider. Well, and on Jim's side, you see this full set of Soulfire Grandmasters and Seeker of the Ways. Does that make you want to go for Arc Lightning or maybe Bathe in Dragonfire, or it's just still too expensive?
Well, I think Bathe in Dragonfire is okay to bring in here for some of the cards you mentioned, plus what else is going on in Jim's sideboard with 2 copies of Bramaz, King of Oreskos. That's a very problematic card for mono red, so I think that Bathe in Dragonfire can come in here, both as a concession to Jim's quality creatures and to Bramaz specifically. Once you get past Bramaz, I think the 2 copies of Magma Spray in Jim's sideboard definitely come in here. Cheap removals at its best. And past that, there's nothing that's really that attractive.
Yeah, on Jim's side, it's just the Bramaz and Magma Spray, so not too much of a transform sideboard here from Jim.
And I think it's pretty easy for Jim to remove his copies of Valorous Stance while he's on the draw, certainly.
Yeah, the Valor Stance really just used to protect his own lifelinkers in this matchup. The removal clause, non-existent.
So, Jim has 3 Valorous Stance, 1 Treasure Cruise, 4 copies of Outpost Siege. Those are 8 pretty inefficient cuts. Pretty easy for him to upgrade here. I suppose you can make an argument because he has some inefficient tools. You could see something like Sarkhan come in. I think it's a little slow for the matchup. I'd probably just stick to the Magma Sprays and his copies of Bramaz.
So when you're on Milo's side and you're boarding in something like Eidolon of the Great Revel, I want to look at what do you board out in the matchup? I mean, if Jim's on all these 1 mana, 2 damage spells, Goblin Rabblemaster starts to become a little unwieldy, but at the same time, it's one of his higher impact cards. But by the same token, a lot of JB's removal is really good here. Wild Slash, Searing Blood, Lightning Strike. I'm not sure I'd want to cut any of them.
I wouldn't touch the removal spells. I think I think Stoke the Flames is not super efficient against Jim, but because he's bringing in Bramaz and the card's just so powerful, you can't really get away from it. All the other removals very good here as well. I think I know that I err on the side of sideboarding this out more than a lot of other red players that I know. But Goblin Rabblemaster to me in a matchup where Jim is sideboarding into 2 copies of Magma Spray to go alongside his 4 mana copies of Wild Slash, I just don't think it hangs here.
Yeah, if we look at our backup feature match between Masa Tokotome and Danny Jessup, that's a Sultai Control versus the Sultai Reanimator style deck. Tokotome takes down the first game, so the Whip of Erebos deck showing its strength against Sultai Control. Remember, the winner of that will go on to face the winner of this matchup.
There's some matchups where if the Jeskai deck has the token package here, Hordeling Outburst, maybe some copies of Race the Alarm, I think you can pretty comfortably cut Mardu Scout because 2 mana for our 1-toughness creature is just too bad against those cards. Jim has no real specific ways to punish him for 1 toughness. 1 and 2 toughness is basically the same against his deck. So I think that the Mardu Scout is still okay here.
Yeah, it does seem the cards the Mardu Scout will trade with most of Jim's creatures. It's not like Jim's bringing in cards like Arc Lightning that just completely destroy you for playing Mardu Scout.
Exactly. The same thing is true of Foundry Denizen as well. Jim's build is not particularly punishing to 1-toughness creatures, so.
Yeah, we
I
can
think there
see
is some, honestly, I think there is some outside chance that JB Milo brings in his copies of Prophetic Flame Speaker, because Jim is really overloading on 2 damage effects in this matchup. He's got 2/2 creatures. He's got 6 shocks post board. Prophetic Flame Speaker might be pretty good.
It's certainly something that, at the size of 1/3, it's not clear how many answers to it Jim has
It lines up pretty
available to him.
because it's a 1/3 double striker. It lines up very nicely against the 2/2s in Jim's deck. It lines up very nicely against Wild Slash and Magma Spray. I don't think it's unreasonable for Milo to bring in, and honestly, I think it's likely to be better than Goblin Rabble Master.
Yeah, that much definitely seems true. Updates for the other parts of the bracket, if you're following some of the people here. We have Dylan Lurch on Obzon midrange taking game 1 off Jacob Gio. Yep. And JB Milo. This time he'll have a chance to be on the play, which is where he wants to be in the matchup. Though last game there was a lot of trading going on in the early turns. The extra card, the play draw didn't seem to matter as much.
Once you get past a certain point in the game, then it's just a raw attrition sort of battle, and Jeskai aggro has a huge edge there. But JB Milo's advantage is in the early turns of the game, and that is really play draw biased. And Jim, with some discipline there, he mulliganed a hand with a bunch of Pain lands, a Mantis Rider, a Stoke the Flames. The type of hand where I think is, it's round 1 of the Swiss. You don't know what your opponent's playing. It's the type of hand that Jim can keep. But in this matchup, just too slow, and I don't think Jim is really looking for that many copies of Shivan Reef and Battlefield Forge. He has to be concerned about his life total.
Now tell me about Stoke the Flames. It's a card that Jim has decided to keep in, possibly in anticipation of things like Prophetic Flame Speaker.
Well, I think the problem is, I don't like Stoke the Flames very much in this matchup from, the red-white aggro side, the Jeskai aggro side. Jim's deck is biased towards beating mid-range decks, and as a result, he just has cards in his deck that are worse. Valorous Stance, Treasure Cruise, Outpost Siege, I think are all worse cards. So it's not an efficient card in the matchup, but Jim's just working with worse tools.
Now, is there a chance that Jim actually can keep some Outpost Siege in? We did see Outpost Siege actually be an excellent weapon for him last game. He traded a lot of Wild Slashes away, a lot of 2/2s away, and Outpost Siege, it carried him through the late game.
I think it's fine. I just don't think it's a card that Jim's really looking for in his opening hand, and it's a card he doesn't want to draw that many copies of. If things are going his way, it can be a good tool.
So yeah, certainly on the draw, a 4-mana sorcery that doesn't directly impact the board, maybe something he just can't do.
Yep.
All right, Jim on 6 cards. He's on the draw. Milo starts off with a mountain, but no play. We go over to Jim's hand. He has a temple. See multiple Mantis Riders and Soulfire Grandmaster in his hand. Not sure how many lands he has. That may be what he's searching for off temple.
And Milo with a very reactive hand here, just a ton of removal.
Jim will scry to the bottom. Let's go back to JB. Bathe in Dragonfire was his draw. He has brought this in on the sideboard. And yeah, no play. He'll pass the turn. It is unusual for his deck to not have a creature during the first couple turns. You do see he does have a creature. It's Goblin Rabble Master. I believe the only creature in his opener.
And Jim's just not going to cast into open mana like this. What else is going on with JB's hand? It's got to be removal spells or 3-drops. And I don't think Jim has any inclination to just cast a Soulfire Grandmaster
and get it Searing Blooded.
Yeah. Just no way that's happening. So it'll be interesting. Someone's going to have to blink first. And with Milo having Rabble Master in his hand, he really wants Jim to just tap out for something he can kill so he gets an opportunity to deploy the Rabble Master. But I don't think Jim's going to play into that scenario if he can avoid it.
Go back to Milo. He did draw a second copy of Rabble Master that turn. He only has the 3 lands, so he has a 3rd land here. It looks like he has double Searing Blood, double Rabble Master, Lightning Strike, and Bathe in Dragonfire. So a lot of good options here. 3 lands. And here's Discipline on Milo's side. Not going to go for the turn 3 Rabble Master. His end step plays are the 2 copies of Searing Blood and Lightning Strike.
And I don't think either of these players are going to blink for a real long time.
The difficulty I'm having here, so if Milo plays the game this way, which it's a very legitimate way to play it, at what point does Milo have to cast something? If they just trade lands, I mean, things aren't, he draws Lightning Strike for the turn. Not much change.
He can just wait. If he still has 1 mana plays in his deck, he can wait for those. On top of that, Milo is waiting. A very good card for Milo to draw here is Whirling Outburst. That's something that can break this game open. And because Jim doesn't have that card in his deck, Milo is slightly advantaged in the waiting game.
These players currently in Game 2, JB Milo and Jim Davis in top 8 here in Star City Games Standard Open in Dallas. Our first match has finished. That's Michael Miller, the overall 1 seed with his Sultai control deck. 2-0 defeated Jeskai Heroic. And is on the other side of the bracket. Would not meet these players until the finals. And Jim with no land either, so both players just passing. And I think Milo, up to 8 cards in hand, doesn't want to have to discard here or even main phase a kill spell. So now he's going to go try for a Rabble Master.
Yeah, he can either discard a hand size, send a Wild Slash at Jim, or do this. And honestly, I'm not sure this is the right play. He may be better served just Wild Slashing Jim, but, the most obvious play is just cast your Rabble Master.
Well, Wild Slash is the play, but the Wild Slash comes from Jim. He'll Wild Slash down the Rabble Master and then draw a replacement copy of Wild Slash. Both players are sitting here on 3 lands and full grips of 7 cards.
Yep. It's a curious game, but when both players are overloaded on removal spells post-board, if everything just dies, you can see the game play out like this.
Yep, and it's Mantis Rider from Jim, and the haste breaks the serve. Milo down to 17. One thing that Jim does have going for him is one of his 7 cards is a copy of Treasure Cruise. So if things eventually get to a point where things start trading, Jim is in a fine spot. The draw from Milo, that's a copy of Arc Lightning.
I like just getting the expensive sorcery out of his hand right now.
Yeah. Arc Lightning or Bathe in Dragonfire?
Arc Lightning, because you're still worried about Bermaz.
Certainly. Yeah, that much makes sense. You see on Milo's side, he's going to go for Lightning Strike.
And part of this may be a concession to tempo. He wants to leave up the Wild Slash in the event that Jim deploys one of his 2s.
Jim with a draw of another Treasure Cruise. Maybe one more than he wants to have right now. He actually has brought in the second Treasure Cruise out of the sideboard in this matchup.
I think he's anticipating a game where there's just a lot of trading, a lot of cheap removal, and Treasure Cruise is a route to victory.
Now, here's the other Mantis Rider from Jim. It'll swing in and put Milo down to 14. Milo left up 1 mana for that Wild Slash, but that's not going to help against a 3-3. Milo draws Mardu Scout for the turn. If he wants to kill this Mantis Rider, it's going to take his whole turn, and he probably has to. And here will be Arc Lightning, 3 to the Mantis Rider. Both players on 3 lands. Really interesting game developing from here.
And Milo has a slight edge here in the winning game because he has Hordeling Outburst to blow it all open, and Jim's on 2 pain lands. Temple of Epiphany is a huge draw for Jim here, as it's going to help him get to Treasure Cruise faster. It's now a pain-free source of blue mana, which is something that Jim really needs.
Now, Jim does have 1 remaining threat in his hand. He does have Soulfire Grandmaster. But the game is starting to look as though, Jim is really starting to, now that his Mantis Riders have been answered, he's going for that control route now.
Yeah, he has no other real path to pursue.
We'll go for Soulfire Grandmaster, and here is a chance for JB to break serve. He does have both, he can play a creature and a kill spell for Soulfire this turn.
Yeah, it's especially good if he draws a land, because then he has Searing Blood plus Mardu Scout.
Yeah, he would love to, and well, it's not a land, but it's a Monastery Swiftspear, which may just be the combination he wants anyway.
It's the same deal. He gets to play a threat here and kill the Soulfire Grandmaster.
Yeah, with Searing Blood, not Wild Slash.
Now the question is, if he's positive that Jim has Wild Slash in hand and all of his plays kind of suggest that he has the staring contest, he might be better served just Searing Blooding as the first order of business and then casting the Swiftspear, because Jim either has to, use the Wild Slash.
He's going to do it.
Yeah, this is a heads-up play here from Milo. He just senses that there's Wild Slash in hand. Playing the Swiftspear first is so bad because then the Wild Slash gets a gain.
Well played, JB Milo. So he loses 1 damage on the Swiftspear, but if it was played in the other order, Jim would gain 2 life. So he's actually being more efficient right now.
Right. Just a heads-up play.
That's something, if you see it when your opponent's like, okay, Searing Blood your guy, now play Swiftspear, you have to think, now you know something's up.
It's Moron or Master. There's some plays that you see where it's either, this person is playing in their first Magic tournament, or this person is understanding some pretty complicated lines of play. In JB Milo's case, it's the latter.
So for Jim, he's going to, those Monastery Swiftspear is played, Jim takes a pain to go down to 12.
Beautiful.
And takes care of it.
Love it.
Though, to be fair, this is playing into Jim's plan. With all these tradings that are happening, they were getting closer and closer to a cheap Treasure Cruise.
No, this is still going kind of Jim's way right now, but Milo did do his best to sequence things in such a fashion that it wasn't the end of the world.
See Jim playing a 5th land and passing. Milo still with Mardu Scout and 1 Rabble Master remaining as far as threats go. He has Jim down to 12, and this is the threat he has been looking for. It's Hordeling Outburst.
That's the draw, because Jim's deck is not punishing one-type creatures. Jim's clearly sitting on a boatload of spot removal. This is one of the best cards in the matchup for JB.
Yeah, doesn't even have negate. So Jim's best answer to cards like Hordeling Outburst isn't a removal spell. It's things like Seeker of the Way or Soulfire Grandmaster. And Milo is more than ready to answer those cards.
Yeah, it's workarounds, not direct answers.
Here we go. Hordeling Outburst from Milo. 3 goblins into play as we go back to Jim Davis.
And Jim's looking at a Stoke, thinking about pointing a Stoke here, potentially at one of these tokens. I think Milo's life total is a little too high to look at a burnout plan here. And I think he wants to cast something this turn just to make the Treasure Cruise a bit more efficient. So yeah, it's not pretty, but Jim might have to just gun down one of these tokens.
Yeah. So now we go back over to Jim. Yeah, does he want to do something on the end step here?
Yep. Not pretty, but that's where we're at.
We stoked down a token.
Listen, Jim's not thrilled about it, but that's what you got to do.
And we go back over to Jim's side. So now he's going to have to go through a lot of resources. The good news on Jim's side is with 2 copies of Treasure Cruise, he may just have the resources to one-for-one his way through Hordeling Outburst. It sounds really ugly, but it could happen.
That's got to be his workaround here. He doesn't have anything else he can really do, particularly because JB's hand is so good at answering creatures. You know, if Jim's intent is to block, JB can play that game.
Go back over to Jim. We see does have land 6. It's a fetch land. He's at 12. Going to have to manage resources here, but he doesn't have any of those 2-drops or any of those creature answers to this. I guess he has 1 Soulfire Grandmaster in hand, but you have to assume if you're Jim that this Soulfire Grandmaster you play, it is not long for the game.
He may get a little bit on the way out. You know, he picked up a Lightning Strike as well, but if this runs into Searing Blood, then you're kind of trading even. Not the greatest spot to be in.
And that may be the line. You see him fetching here for land 4. If he gets Soulfire Grandmaster down, expects it to die, and hopes to get some life gain on the path. You see still 6 cards in JB's hand.
Yep.
At some point, these burn spells from Milo's will just start going upstairs.
And Jim doesn't have a lot of recourse against that. He can gain some life if JB cooperates with him a little bit, but it's just hard to do.
And once again, if Jim wants to do this play, we play Soulfire Grandmaster and a removal spell. And we've seen Milo do this before. He can force Jim to burn a really poor creature. If Milo starts the turn, for example, just by Searing Blooding the Soulfire Grandmaster, now Jim has to decide, do I want to save this Lightning Strike for a possible Rabble Master, or do I want to Lightning Strike a token?
Yeah, there's only so much power here in the Treasure Cruise when you have to use Lightning Strikes and Stoke the Flames to take down a third of a Hordeling Outburst.
Yeah, so here's Soulfire Grandmaster from Jim Davis. Back over to JB Milo. See him bunch of Searing Bloods, Stoke the Flames, Lightning Strike, Rabble Master, Mardu Scout in hand, Bathe in Dragonfire, just fire everywhere. And it looks like he's going to go for Wild Slash on the Soulfire Grandmaster.
Yep.
The mana efficiency at a premium here because he wants to dash the Mardu Scout after this is said and done.
Correct. The cost here is Jim may not cooperate for the remainder of the game and present something for Milo to Searing Blood, but JB has so many good cards in his hand that he probably doesn't need a Searing Blood, and most likely Jim's going to play something at some point.
Well, you think about it, it's a loss of 3 damage by not playing the Lightning Strike, or not playing the Searing Blood, but at the same time, and this is excellent. So Wild Slash, Jim goes for the Lightning Strike on the token, and now JB will Searing Blood in response.
Yeah, that cuts off the lifelink portion here, So
Jim takes 3, he's goes down to 8, and then takes the hit off the Goblin token. So Jim down to 7. You look at Milo's hand, he has still managed to hang on to a copy of Stoke the Flames in hand and Mardu Scout. He has a lot of damage at the ready.
Yeah. I'm curious here if Jim has to just start off this turn with casting a copy of Treasure Cruise here, because he can sense that playing Goblin Rabble Master and saying go here is maybe not ending well for him.
So Rabble Master on Jim's side. He has Treasure Cruise, Stoke, and Rabble Master. Yeah. Maybe Jim this defensive game plan Jim's been on is not panning out. It's time to switch over to offense. Here's Rabble Master and a Goblin token swinging in. Milo down to 13. 4 cards in hand. 4 lands, 4 cards in graveyard. Jim could Treasure Cruise, but it would tap him out. He's not going to do that. He'll leave up Stoke the Flames. And we're back to Milo. Draws another Searing Blood. That is disgusting. I mean, I don't know how much damage of this game has been dealt by creatures from JB, but it's 5 or fewer.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
He's just 20ing Jim to the dome. And he just passes the turn here. Look at the patience there. Gosh, that's... Woo! I love the expression, just very calmly draws, just passes on 3 mana for Jim. Just, oh, God. That's not what you want to see.
Look at Jim.
It's not what you want to see
What
happen.
is going on over there?
It's probably trouble.
And this is great because, you know, Milo knows, let's say he's Searing Bloods here and then attacks. If Jim has a removal spell, there's a chance that the Stoke the Flames gets stranded. In this setup, he gets to Stoke for sure this turn. If there's a removal spell, Jim might have to just fire it off in a turn, and then your the Searing Blood in your hand is still going to be fine.
So we're going to go to end step. Jim is going to Stoke upstairs on end step, I believe. He's using the Goblin to convoke it so he doesn't have to use a Pain Land. So here Stoke the Flames will see where it's going. And now if he got Jim to point the Stoke, oh man, it doesn't even matter. He's going to point the Stoke at JB. He has to, but yeah, so JB will go to 9. And now we'll see if JB lets Jim untap. He may not. Yeah, Searing Blood on the Goblin. Yep. Now that Jim makes the commitment. And
because
Jim down to 4.
It's too much damage now to sit on the Stoke. I think this is a safer play ultimately.
Jim down to 4. We know that JB has a Stoke in hand.
Lightning Strike as well.
Yeah, he's got enough burn.
And JB waiting there in part because he doesn't want Jim to fizzle the removal spell by doing something like Wild Slash my Rabble Master in response.
Yeah, that's what makes the play really impressive there. There's so much temptation to go for the burn spell immediately so that you can get your Goblin through. What I like about Milo is he's recognized here that this 1 damage the Goblin dealt isn't actually that relevant. He kind of has the lethal burn spell both ways.
Yeah.
So what's more important than getting a Goblin, damaging with the Goblin, the important part is that Jim doesn't fizzle the Searing Blood, and Milo played in a way to make sure that that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if Jim doesn't really do anything, well then go ahead, knock yourself out, and Stoke the Flames out of turn. But once Jim puts the shields down there, that's a great spot to stick the Searing Blood.
And Jim goes on his 2nd cruise of the game, but this cruise is not going to get him where he wants to go. 3 lands down his hand along with Seeker of the Way.
Boat. Because it's a boat that goes places. You get it.
Perhaps. Well, anyway, Jim will attack with the Goblin here, leave back Seeker of the Way, but we've played right here. I believe Milo just has the lethal burn.
Yeah, I would imagine he's just going to be pointing at Stoke the Flames over at Jim here momentarily, and we'll be on to game 3.
1 damage across. Will Milo trade? Absolutely not. He wants to make sure he has that 4 mana for Stoke, and he goes down to 8. Here's Jim, Mystic Monastery, Seeker of the Way. We'll go back to Milo. I imagine Milo will main phase this Stoke so that if Jim has a counter, he doesn't want Jim getting lifelink off it.
Correct. Usually you see spots like this where you're supposed to cast in the upkeep, but because of the prowess trigger, Milo wants to cast this right now.
Draws return, Jim has 2 cards. Milo, now he hits land 4. And now I think he just wants to make sure I think he has 2 lightning strikes. It's probably safer of him to just lightning strike a bunch. And he'll go Stoke upstairs at Jim. Jim does not have the answer, and we are on to game 3.
A curious game there with Milo sort of being a control burn deck. Kind of an odd one.
And so JB Milo evens it up with Jim Davis here. This is going to be an impressive performance again and going to go to a close game 3. Remember, the winner of this will face the winner between Masato Katome and Danny Jessup on a Sultai Control versus Sultai Reanimator.
And it looks like the card that Jim cut from his deck there was Valorous Stance. Now, Valorous Stance becomes a lot sweeter on the play because Jim might be able to present a board and then protect it.
Sure. 2-mana instants that protect his creatures, especially cards like Seeker of the Way, do gain a lot of value in this matchup.
It's also nice against Searing Blood because Searing Blood is predicated on the creature actually dying. So Valorous Stance does some important work there.
So if reviewing the game that Jim just played, it seemed to go according to plan to him. He played a Mantis Rider, another Mantis Rider, forced action from JB, and then eventually transitioned into a Kill Spells and Treasure Cruise deck. Now, is this game plan, Milo was able to still win through it, and I'm wondering how much of this is maybe that's just not like this is a bad matchup for Jim versus there is a part where Jim ends the game with 8 lands in play to Milo's 4. And that spell density did help Milo.
That's definitely part of it, though Jim is playing with quite a few more lands and some card drawing spells, so he's going to ultimately end up with more lands in play in the average game. I think the big problem is just hoarding Outburst. Jim doesn't have his own copies. He doesn't have Arc Lightning. He doesn't have clean answers to it. And because JB is so flush with removal, it's not like blocking is a very good option either. So when Hoarding Outburst shows up in games like that, it's just going to be problematic. Yes, Jim got to Treasure Cruise twice, but Jim also had to use 2 removal spells on...
He had to stoke a 1/1.
Yeah, you know, so the Treasure Cruises were just catching him up to those initial bad exchanges. They weren't powering him through.
What I do like is the Hoarding Outbursts from JB Milo's deck created enough pressure that Jim had to play creatures to try to deal with it, and we saw 3 Searing Bloods cast by JB Milo that game, and all 3 of them connected on the 3 life.
Yeah. You can't beat everything, and Jim this weekend clearly gunning for devotion strategies. He's looking for help in the mid-range matchup with cards like Outpost, Siege of Valor stance. A concession his list is making is Hoarding Outburst is just good against him.
He has no Anger of the Gods, for example.
That's just a thing that's happening to him this weekend. Clearly has not cost him up until this match right here. That game was basically determined by Hoarding Outburst, and now we get to see whether or not it catches up to him a second time.
We're going to go into Game 3. These players go into Game 3. Right now, we talked about before how we're nearing the end of Quarter 1. This is our last regular open before the Quarter 1 Invitational. Our this one leads up to the Invitational, in 2 weeks in Richmond. The Quarter 2 leads up to the Invitational in Columbus at the Origins Game Fair. But now we have the rest of the schedules for the year as well. If you're wondering when's the next time we're going to be near you, how do you play in one of these? We have our Quarter 3 schedule, which has now been announced. This starts in Charlotte with the Modern Grand Prix. You heard us talk about it all weekend. That's June 12th through 14th. You're going to want to make it to that one. We'll talk more about that later. As we go, though, from Charlotte, we start to make our way through the Midwest.
Indianapolis, Baltimore, and then Chicago for the first time in Open Series history. Those will all be standard Open Series. Then one in Richmond, a Modern Open in Washington, D.C. Then we go to a Standard Grand Prix in London, August 14th through 16th. Legacy Open Series in Charlotte, August 22nd and 23rd. And then the Season 3 Invitational in New Jersey with Standard and Legacy as the invitational formats. And a Standard Open Series August 28th through 30th with me, you, and Cedric Phillips calling the action.
Yeah, so a lot of tournaments throughout the country. You can find our entire schedule for 2015 and ones in your area at www.starcitygames.com. We get back to the match. So both games, the player on the play has won, but both times we've seen both. The games have been very different. We've seen both players stick on small amount of lands, and it's really been this game a lot about tempo, a lot about really maintaining the ability to cast 2 spells in a turn. That seems really important.
Exactly. It's one of those things where it's very nice for Milo to get off to an aggressive start here because tempo dictates so much. Tempo just dictates so much here. And so when there's a staring contest between the 2 players, Jim can try to set up this Treasure Cruise game and back up things with Wild Slash to break serve. When Milo gets off to a fast start, that puts pressure on Jim to respond on his own turn, either with removal spells or tapping out for creatures. And that's a game plan that I think JB plays a lot better than Jim does. Jim wants the game to be basically a staring contest. Only Hoarding Outburst is problematic in that style of game. Otherwise, he can sit back, kill stuff, make his land drops, get to Treasure Cruise, start playing threats with the ability to, play Soulfire Grandmaster, and even if it dies, get to gain some life on the way out with some removal spell. That's the type of game that Jim wants to play.
And that is what we saw Game 1. It was those 2 drops plus Wild Slashes that just were able to get Jim the game. Eventually, he traded it up to the point where he had Outpost Siege, which is a lot like a Treasure Cruise in those scenarios where it's the card advantage he's looking for.
Exactly. And the life gain can effectively be card advantage in this matchup where JB is playing a heavy burn element.
Pressure will be on both players then.
You can see Jim just does not have a lot going on for this kind of matchup. You saw that game, Stoke the Flames just wasn't very good.
Yeah, the fact that he's had to keep Stoke the Flames in is a little bit of a signal that this is not a preferred matchup.
Yeah. It's just a concession he's made to the way that his deck is constructed.
Right now we're solving mulligans, both players on 6-card hands. Jim not certain about his. Looks like Milo has a keeper on his side.
I think Jim might be looking at a 1-lander.
Actually, no, Milo down to 5.
I think that was a land-heavy mulligan there because I saw the 6 cards Milo pulled back. 2 of them were lands and a Mardu Scout. So if he's sending back that hand, it's because there's just too many mountains.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, if it's 2 lands, mountains, Mardu Scout, and 3 spells, you're keeping.
Yeah.
But with 4 land, what's the number of lands in which you have to ship that? Was 4 too many, or
4 is too many for Milo's list.
Sure, yeah, he just has nothing to do on 4 lands.
Right, he has no real hedging against flooding out, with the exception of Fire Trigger Crusader. That's really the only thing he's got going on.
All right, so as they go to Game 3, our other matches are also all in Game 3 right now. Dylan Lurch and Jacob Gio, they're a 4-5 matchup on Game 3. Also, Danny Jessup takes Game 2 to tie it up with Masato Katome. Lots of deciders here. Jim on a 6-card hand, Milo on 5. Now, the mono red deck can win on 5. This isn't just a burn deck that you'd expect.
Well, Whirling Outburst is JB Milo's version of Treasure Cruise, and he can cast it whenever he wants to.
Instead of drawing 3 cards, you draw 3 1/1s.
He can also just get 2 lands and stuff for the whole game. And since most of the stuff trades with other stuff, if Jim draws too many lands, that can also recoup the mulligan.
Yeah, that is what we saw that more or less play out in Game 2. We'll see if hopefully Milo gets something he can battle with. Looks like he does have some lands and spells, pretty good composition. And we'll be underway. Yeah, he's excited enough about it. Jim starts on Battlefield Forge. Remember, Jim had to think a while on his hand as well, so maybe missing a key piece. We'll see if it gets to play.
Oh, he's got a great hand here. It looks like he's got Flooded Strand, a 2-drop, a Wild Slash. It's a quality hand.
Yeah, Slash will take care of the Foundry Street Denizen from Milo as we go back to Jim. Stoke the Flames is the draw. Jim only has 2 lands, it looks like. He does have a turn 2 Seeker of the Way, and we're going to see him make that right now. And it does have Mantis Rider if he can get there.
Yeah. But the rest of his tools don't seem great right now. He's got a Mantis Rider in his hand, can't really cast.
Stoke the Flames, that's never really a good tool in this matchup.
Yeah. Far away from casting and not very good even if he could.
But Wild Slash into Seeker, that's great on Jim's side. Can JB Milo deal with Seeker of the Way? You'll see here, his draw for the turn, Goblin Rabblemaster. That is what I believe he wants to see here. So Searing Blood takes care of Seeker of the Way. Jim down to 14, I believe. Yeah, he's had to fetch and pain twice. His lands are beating him up, and this is a good spot. Jim misses his land drop, but he did get an insurance policy on Rabblemaster. He did draw Wild Slash for the turn, and that's pretty big.
Yeah, no, every removal spell that's castable is fine. The only way that Jim really gets punished for missing his land drops here is in the event that Milo finds Whirling Outburst. Otherwise, this is fine.
Yeah, well, up until this turn, Jim did not have an answer to Rabblemaster. So had he not drawn the Wild Slash there, this could have ran away with the game.
No, he was sitting on Lightning Strike. He still had an answer.
Or does that? Oh, you're absolutely right. It does have Strike, and that's actually how he'll choose to deal with Rabblemaster. But because this Battlefield Forge, he does take a point of damage, and Jim is down to 13. Yep. Now, most of that's been done to himself. See here, at more damage, he's going to go ahead and crack Fetchland, Flesdrand down to 12 for Plains, and he's going to have to go to 11 to cast the Mantis Rider.
And this might be one of those scenarios where if Milo just dashes a Mardu Scout, Jim may just have to block.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Zettel has taken 9 this game, and only 3 of it is from Milo.
Yeah, 2 fetch lands and a lot of Battlefield Forge hits.
Yeah, Mantis Rider swings in. Milo down to 17. Another Rabblemaster, the draw for JB Milo. That gives him a difficult decision. He can dash Mardu Scout, he can play Goblin Rabblemaster. He has a Stoke the Flames in his hand. That's not online just yet. Dashing Mardu Scout is the best on this turn, but it also leaves him with no board.
Yep. It also maybe, depending on how much he values the Rabblemaster, he may try to wait a turn before casting the Rabblemaster and hope by just hard casting the Mardu Scout that he might induce a removal spell.
So he goes with Rabblemaster, the Goblin swings into Mantis Rider, and Milo passes. Jim has a Rabblemaster of his own along with Stoke the Flames and Wild Slash. It looks like a good setup for Jim Davis.
Yeah, this is a pretty solid spot here. But there's a lot of considerations here. For example, from a mana efficiency standpoint, it may be better for Jim to go ahead and stoke the Goblin Rabblemaster in lieu of using his Wild Slash. Another consideration is Jim may not want to play Goblin Rabblemaster at all for the entirety of the game if he can avoid it, because that turns off Searing Blood on the other side of the table. So this is a really complicated turn.
And Jimmy is at 11. He knows he's ahead on the board by a pretty significant amount.
Tapping out for Rabble Master is not an acceptable play in my mind. It's just an issue of if Jim wants to use which removal spell does he want to use? Wild Slash or Stoke the Flames?
Mantis Rider will swing in, put Milo down to 14. Jim's going to pass. And by passing here, he's actually turned on Milo's Stoke the Flames.
But I think that actually might be a mild trap here from Jim, because Jim might be saying, if I kill this thing and he responds by stoking, that's an opportunity for me to cast my Rabble Master and get in one hit. And I devour his Holzer.
Milo on 3 lands, Lightning Strike, Stoke the Flames, Mardu Scout. He can just go to combat here. Now, if Milo just dashes Mardu Scout, that in a way that next levels Jim's play as well.
In a way, yeah. But I think if he goes and dashes Mardu Scout and in response Jim goes, kill your Goblin Rabble Master, now Stoke the Flames is off the table for that turn. And Jim has enough control over the damage race that he might be able to say no blocks on your Scout.
Sure. If Milo really believes Jim doesn't have a kill spell, there's a lot of plays. He can pre-combat, play Mardu Scout. All right, Milo goes to combat. In response, Jim's going to cast Stoke the Flames on Rabble Master. Jim does take 1, though. That Battlefield Forge has hit him 4 times this game.
Yeah. Although better than not having red mana at all. You know, that's the cost.
It'll take care of Rabble Master. We'll see if Milo wants to Stoke back. It does not look so. Maybe he wants to just Lightning Strike back. That Stoke is 1 more damage.
I actually think he may want to dash the Mardu Scout this turn. He's got 7 points of burn in his hand. And Jim is a couple turns away from able to end this thing. He might say go to 7 and try to burn you out.
Dashes Scout. Jim's down to 7. Milo has 7 points of burn.
Yeah.
Now, but Jim's draw, this is a pretty big one. It's a second copy of Mantis Rider. Jim can cast it, but this is once again, you see this Battlefield Forge has just been a thorn in Jim's side. He could cast Mardu, the second Mantis Rider, but the difference between 7 and 6 is huge here. If Milo draws a land and Jim has 2 Mantis Riders, he can dash Mardu Scout, and Jim's forced into blocking.
Yep.
And he's going to do it. It's down to 6. Here's 2 Mantis Riders. Milo goes to 8. And first time I think Milo wants to top deck this Mountain.
Oh, real bad. Mountain is an insane draw here from Milo.
So 8 and 6. Jim has Wild Slash and Stoke the Flames in his hand. If he draws a land next turn, it would have to be a Mountain to cast all of them. He's still choked on red and taking a lot of damage off his own Battlefield Forge. Can Milo draw the Mountain? He does not. He draws Foundry Street Denizen. Now, if JB Milo, say you're Jim Davis, and JB Milo just dashes Mardu Scout here, do you have to block it?
I think so, because Jim's in a very good spot if... I think that Jim's in a pretty good spot here if he offers up a block. Because
taking it seems way too risky.
The problem is, because what's your plan? Your plan is to attack with both and then use the Battlefield Forge to...
Because then you go to 2 and a Wild Slash would kill you.
Exactly. So it doesn't even have to be land Lightning Strike at that point. If you don't draw a red source of mana that fails to deal damage to you, then just Wild Slash kills you all of a sudden, on top of land plus Lightning Strike potentially killing you.
And JB is going to start with Foundry Street Denizen. And we'll see if he...
I don't think he can dash the Mardu Scout now, because once he casts the Foundry Street Denizen...
He's planning to Lightning Strike down a Mantis Rider.
Yeah.
But wants to do it on Jim's turn. Jim's draws Goblin Rabble Master. That's no help. I don't think he really wants to cast any red spells.
No.
Though his whole hand is red. Does make things problematic. 2 Mantis Riders swinging. It's going to be Lightning Strike on one of them. Because Jim got to untap, I said he could have convoked a Stoke there because he had 2 red creatures. Decides not to. JB Milo goes down to 5. I would have been interested in, if he does have the Stoke, I would have thought he'd convoke it there. But one Mantis Rider remains on Jim's side. Milo's at 5. Jim, and we know has a Wild Slash, has a Goblin Rabblemaster, and a third card.
Yeah.
All right, that's 2 Rabblemasters on Jim's side. The Stoke was already used. Jim has to decide now, does he play a Rabblemaster post-combat? Can he afford to go to 5? It does give him a blocker.
Pretty risky against Searing Blood, potentially.
Absolutely. He knows one of Milo's cards is Mardu Scout. He doesn't know the other one. We know it's Stoke the Flames, which 4 damage is a lot right here. And Jim will go to 5 for Rabblemaster and goes back. Really close game here. 5 life points apiece. It will be Rabblemaster on Jim's side. This is post-combat though, so no Goblin is made. And at 5-5, we are back to Milo. Jim hoping that this Mantis Rider plus Wild Slash is enough.
I mean, if the play here from Milo's side of the table is Searing Blood, then Jim still has the kill next turn.
Milo draws his 4th land. Has Mardu Scout and Stoke the Flames. He's 1 short right now. Milo's in toss out. If he dashes the Mardu Scout, Jim will block with Rabblemaster, swing, and cast Wild Slash for the win. If he holds back, then I think Milo's dead on board. So Milo's gonna make that play. He'll dash Mardu Scout.
No, he's just
he's
playing this
playing
block.
Mardu Scout to block.
Yeah, he's looking potentially to either Stoke the Flames, the Mantis Rider, or just be able to cobble together an Alpha Strike next turn.
Mystic Monastery, the draw for Jim Davis. Jim's got to be really careful here. If he goes for, well, the Goblin Rabblemaster makes things interesting because Milo will have, I guess he won't have to block the Goblin token.
Well, the problem is,
go to 1.
if he goes to 1 and he respects the possibility of Jim having a kill spell, then they get in this weird staring contest where, you know, if Milo goes to burn him out, Jim can respond with the lethal burn spell. If Milo finds a second burn spell to go over the top,
neither player can burn the other one out.
Right.
And and what a third game here.
Yeah, this is such
Both
a
players
spread.
at 5. Stoke the Flames in Milo's hand. Jim has Wild Slash. Also has Goblin Rabblemaster and Mystic Monastery, but those don't seem too relevant right now. It's been a game where Milo mulliganed to 5, but he got a lot of help from Jim's copy of Battlefield Forge. Here's the Goblin token off Rabblemaster. Go to attacks for Jim. It's going to be all 3, it looks like.
So with this sort of attack, I think Milo is going to end up in a spot where he can still draw Stoke the Flames to win.
So if Milo probably has to trade the whole board away. The Rabblemaster's 3+. Yeah, he's going to put all his creatures in front of Jim's, which means he's locked into casting this Stoke that's in his hand.
Yeah. And at that point, I guess Jim... Well, the problem with this play now is that Jim has picked up Mystic Monastery. So if he wants to, he can keep himself at 5 and wait until next turn to deploy the Rabblemaster.
So what I like about Milo... Okay, so Milo's blocked here, but before damage, he's stoking at Jim, which will put Jim to 1. Jim can't cast the Wild Slash here.
Wow. And then that
because
winds up as red.
he did this before the Mantis Rider damage connected, it locks Jim off red mana. His whole hand is irrelevant.
This is the riskier play. Because now next
Milo
turn,
down to 2, yeah. Okay,
Jim has Mantis Rider, but this is locking out his entire hand, and Milo has a draw to a burn spell.
Come on, top decks right here. Jim at 1, Milo at 2. Can he do it? Flips the top card. And it's no, it's a Searing Blood, and it's so close. But Jim Davis,
wow!
And what a finish! What a match played on both sides. Jim Davis gets it in 3, wins at 1 life from JB Milo at 2. And that'll send Jim to the top 4.
Wow. I mean, that's just, that one was great. Milo there with a bold line of play there, I think sensing that, long term he's got no cards in hand versus Jim's hand.
Right.
So by killing the Mantis Rider, he's playing, again, no hand against 2 cards with an opponent at 5. Went for broke there, which I think is a great risk, and just a little bit short.